Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining us here at the 5th Annual Stanley Bergstein Writing Award. This afternoon, we are going to present a $25,000 check a little later in the program, but first, we're going to start off with a panel discussion. To my left is Jeff Lowe. Jeff?
Thanks, Barry.
Introduce yourself a little.
I was a turf rider for a number of years. Now I work for Team Valor. I've known Barry's passion as a former turf rider for this subject, and we've been working on different ways that we can kind of address some of the issues in the contraction of coverage of horse racing and some of the serious issues that our sport faces. That what can we kind of do or talk about to further that cause, along with this writing award that we've been doing since 2012.
So to further the discussion today, we also have invited as one of our featured guests, Andrew Cohen. Andrew is an analyst, legal analyst for CBS News. He's also the editor of the Marshall Project, which I'll let him explain. And he's also a harness owner and was a former harness journalist. Andrew, welcome to the show.
It's good to be here. Thanks for having me, and thanks for letting me be a part of what is a very worthwhile endeavor. I exchanged many emails and phone calls with Stan Bergstein before his death. He was ardent in his support of reform within horse racing, whether it was thoroughbred horse racing or standardbred horse racing, and so I'm proud to be associated with this and proud to be associated of the cause. You asked me to explain a little bit about what I do. I'm a journalist. We do investigative journalism at the Marshall Project, which focuses on criminal justice. I also do a lot of investigative work for 60 Minutes and CBS Radio News, and before that, The Atlantic. So I was able, in those mainstream outlets, to get some coverage of horse racing and some of the good in horse racing and some of the questionable things that go on in horse racing. And I think it's vital to grow the sport to a new generation of owners, to young people who may be interested, to make sure that there is as much transparency and accountability as possible for an industry that is not always known for it. And so that's why I think awards like this and stories that are done by the folks who are winning and the folks who even have been nominated are so vital.
Thank you very much. Also, we have Natalie Voss. Natalie is a feature writer, and I would term her the most active investigative reporter currently practicing that art in thoroughbred racing. Natalie Voss works for the Paulick Report. Natalie?
Hi, I'm happy to be here. I'm the features editor at the Paulick Report, as Barry said, and I'm excited for this discussion. Good.
Natalie is, she had 4 stories nominated for the Bergstein Award of the 9 that got nominations this year. That has not happened before, and we're very proud to have her on the presentation today. So to kick things off, the contraction in our sport has really hit the media hard. Right now, the only real outlets for investigative journalism are Natalie's Paulick Report. We have the Thoroughbred Commentary, that's sort of an international, I guess, website or blog. It's sort of half European and half American. They've gotten off to a great start. We also have the Blood Horse. They're kind of iffy in terms of their investigative reporting lately. And then we have the good old standby, the TDN, which has always been a great outlet for people that have something to say. What I'd like to start off with is what somebody on the panel might think would be a good idea going forward to perhaps find some other outlets for stories. Jeff, what do you think?
Well, I mean, we've seen that there are a lot of retired turf riders or turf riders that no longer have the capacity that they did, with some of these websites, or like my old publication, Thoroughbred Times, is gone. So one idea is to just kind of create a gathering space for some of those people if they want to contribute, or young up-and-coming riders if they have that kind of drive or interest to really centralize that so that, if you have a blog that only a certain amount of people are aware of, or that you really don't have the following, how can we just kind of centralize things so that important voices are being heard and seen, and really just encourage that kind of contribution.
Okay. Natalie, let's just say for the sake of fun that there was no Paulick Report and you had an urge to write the kind of stories that you have written. Where would you get them published? Where would you seek to get them published?
That's a really good question. I think I would probably have to look more towards outside publications, outside the thoroughbred industry. I think that there's a reluctance for many thoroughbred industry publications to touch investigative stories because what they're thinking is, I don't want to do anything to upset someone I'm going to have to talk to in 2 weeks for a feature story. And I understand that.
Right.
But I'm not sure how you get around that outside of either making it your business to report stories that are investigative as well as other types of content, or if you go someplace where that's not going to be a problem as far as, going towards the newspaper who might be interested in a really good piece of journalism, kind of regardless of which sport it's about. Then, of course, I think still it comes back on the writer if they're a career freelancer. Well, now do I have to be concerned that I'm associated with this type of work? Will people continue to hire me?
Right. Before you worked for Ray, what did you do?
I've done a little bit of everything at various times. I was a freelancer doing sort of light news and features in different horse publications, as well as in Business Lexington here in Kentucky. But I've also worked the sales, I've worked at breeding farms, I've tried to do hands-on stuff as well as developing my writing.
Right. Okay. Andrew, what other outlets do you think a person like Natalie would be able to get her story printed? Any hot ideas?
Well, yeah, I have a couple of hot ideas, but I think we have to also identify the problem. It is such a small universe, relatively speaking, of advertisers and clients and people who affect the industry that it's very hard for people like Natalie to write hard-hitting stories. Not just because you're going to maybe run into them at the track in 2 weeks and you're going to need them for something else, but because of the enormous economic pressures that are brought to bear on investigative journalism. Now, that's a bigger problem in journalism generally. It's a criticism that happens at the network level. It's a criticism that happens with newspapers. It's an age-old thing, right, that you don't want to tick off your advertisers because ultimately you have to be able to pay the bills and the electric bills. I think there is a room. I think, first of all, there are many young and old, male and female writers who love horse racing, whether it's thoroughbred or standardbred. They have something intelligent to say. They have experience to share on these topics and would love to have a safe space, if you will, where they can be candid and they can be objective and they can even be a little subjective if they want, with analysis and commentary, without the fear that if they say something, they're going to get punished or their publication is going to get punished. In other words, there is, I think, a spot for a website where there can be a collection, a gathering of these voices that may occasionally get into the Paulick Report and certainly are in TDN, which is a fine publication, but not on the kind of regular basis. You can have a community, in other words. You can create a community on a website, on a blog, the way we see in sports, the way we see in law, the way we see in other areas of sort of sub-themes in journalism, sub-things in the world. So I think it's a great idea to try to create a product that is independent of the Paulick Report, that is independent of everything that exists now, where people can go and you want to write 500 words, great. You want to write 1,500 words, great. You want to have an instant hot take, as the phrase is these days, on something that's just happened, or you want to go in depth and write 5,000 words. There should be a spot for that, and there should be a mechanism by which that can be a resource that feeds ideas, that generates a talk of reform that's needed in the sport, that gets people talking about issues that sometimes they don't really want to talk about.
Yeah. The beauty about the internet and blogs, there's no space limit. You can write 10 million words and, you're not going to get cut off like in a magazine. I have total admiration for Ray. He and I have had our battles early on, but we're both on the same page now. And whatever happens going forward, he deserves a lot of credit, especially because he needs advertisers and has to make a living. Yet he is very courageous. And when it's time for him to say something, it's no holds barred.
Yeah, he says it, and he allows the people who work with him to say it.
Right.
But I do think that the format where you have breaking news and analysis and charts and all this stuff, I mean, it's a full service product that the Paulick Report is, and so is TDN, and to a certain extent so is the Blood Horse. The idea of a centralized opinion site where you're not going to get the results, you're going to get analysis and commentary, I think is a niche that is unfilled, and I think it's a very important one.
Yeah, Jeff and I have been batting this around for the last 6 months, and we're still in the formulating stage, but I think that we're looking at something like that, where we have X number of guest writers, and they can contribute what or whenever they want to.
Right.
And I think something like that would be a good idea.
And let me just say something quickly. I did not read every single one of the submissions, but I read most of them. And on an objective level, regardless of the subject matter, I mean, these are really good investigative pieces. Like, these are, especially your work, that would stand as good journalism in the broader journalism world. These aren't just good because they focus on our little area that we all care about.
Right.
These are objectively good pieces, which gives me hope that there can be more objectively good pieces.
Sure. Yeah. When the Thoroughbred Racing Association was active prior to the NTRA becoming a player, they had 2 or 3 people that actively tried to plant good stories in the media. That does not exist today. Like, here we are, the Herald Leader in Lexington as an example, or the Louisville Courier Journal. You would think they would be naturals for something like this, yet you never see anything like that.
Yeah, they don't even staff events anymore. There are no full-time turf riders at a newspaper in our country left. But that's not to say that that there's something wrong with those publications. It's just industry-wide. You've seen 40% of the workforce in newsrooms across the country decline just in the last 9 years. So, I mean, these people that are at the top of the charts for our sport, covering our sport, are suddenly, some of them are still kind of out there, and they don't have a space to actually write and see their work out in front of people, where it's not just off on a blog somewhere that maybe not many people are reading.
Right. So, Andrew, when we had breakfast earlier today, you brought something up that I've been thinking about since then, and if you could explain that to our viewers. At the Marshall Report, one of the things you do is you partner with certain news outlets, and you also make available content that they normally otherwise might not even look at.
Right. I think one way to sort of fulfill some of the obligations that we're talking about, the responsibilities the opportunities we're talking about here, is to provide content to mainstream media organizations. The flip side to your point that there are fewer journalists working in newsrooms is that there is still the need for content, especially online. And so what we've been able to do successfully at the Marshall Project is to have our people investigate stories and then go to a New York Times or the Washington Post and say, listen, we have this good story, and it's our story, but we would like it to draw a broader audience. We recognize that more people every day are going to go to the Times site or to the Washington Post site or the Wall Street Journal site than are going to come to our site. So what we do is we come to these organizations and we say, we have something of quality, we think you'll be interested in it, we'll give it to you if you'll publish it in your print edition and if you'll post it online. And what we have found is it's a win-win situation. We get exposure for our product. We get more people curious about what we do. The papers, the news organizations get essentially free content that's quality work. And I think that model could work in the reporting on horse racing. I think good quality work, as it's being produced, could be you approach a Lexington Herald Leader, or you approach the Courier Journal, or you approach the Wall Street Journal, or whatever it is, and you say, you know, we have a decent piece, and it's a feature piece, and maybe you want to run it on the weekend or whatever, but we're going to essentially give it to you, as long as you give us a little credit, and it's a way for, without spending any more money, to get the message across in a much broader way. That's one way I think that at least should be explored in thoroughbred racing, whether it's the Paulick Report, whether it's the Blood Horse. Some of the features in the Blood Horse, to me, are natural features in mainstream news sites around the country, USA Today, other places where they could at least be posted online. Maybe they're too long for print, but they could be at least posted online because some of them are very compelling. Natalie's work is compelling. Some of the other work of some of the other nominees is very compelling. So to me, that's an area of growth where at least you can explore it. Because I'm telling you, as newsrooms diminish the number of journalists, they're diminishing the actual original content.
Right.
And to the extent that they can say to their readers or viewers, hey, this is an original piece, they're happy about that.
So
Right.
your Marshall Project contributed to a Pulitzer Prize this year, right?
That's correct. We won a Pulitzer Prize in 16 months after we started. We joined forces with ProPublica, which is another nonprofit media organization based on donations in the public interest. And we had two reporters who basically, our guy and their guy, started down the path of the same story. And at some point, the two editors said, hey, wait a minute. Instead of competing and fighting with one another, let's join forces. So it was a very poignant story about rape, a reported rape, and it won a Pulitzer Prize. We were nominated for another Pulitzer for a series of stories that we shared with the New York Times. So you get, I mean, it's not beyond the realm of possibility that some of the good work that's been done in investigative reporting in horse racing could one day, if partnered, could generate at least a nomination for a Pulitzer, which I think would be wonderful.
Yeah. So absent some vehicle like the Marshall Report in horse racing, is the onus on the writer to find a place to get their work published before they do it? Or do you think they should just bite the bullet, do the job, and then see where they can get it published?
I think it cuts both ways, and maybe Natalie can chime in as well. I think it cuts both ways. I think if you are a freelance person, and that's what we're talking about, right? We're talking about trying to attract and embrace, bring back into the fold people who know what they're talking about when it comes to horse racing, who don't now have a vehicle or a forum,
Right.
An audience. They have something to say, but they don't know how to say it or who to say it to. What we get at the Marshall Project, and what I used to get a lot at the Atlantic when I was more involved there, were pitches. People email you and they say, listen, I have a good idea for a story. I think it's worth investigating. Here's my angle. Here's what I would like to do. What do you think?
Right.
And then it allows the editor to say, that's a crazy idea, forget it, or we've already done it, or I don't really think you're qualified to do it, or in a happier situation, you say, yeah, you know what, give it a shot, give us 2,000 words or 2,500 words, and we'll work with you because we think what you've done is you found something. It's almost like a form of crowdsourcing. And I think, so if you're out there and you have a story about racing, you're going to, if you're smart, you're going to pitch it to Paulick, to Ray, you're going to pitch it to TDN, to Sue Finley, or you're going to pitch it to Barry, you're going to pitch it to people at the Blood Horse, and if they're smart, they're going to say, yeah, we're going to give it a shot. What you're contemplating, right, is this idea of another entity, another site, another landing spot for some of this material, and I think the more landing spots you have, the more likely you're going to generate content.
Yeah. I think what we really need is another, maybe a few independent ones. The problem with right now you have Paulick, and then you have the Thoroughbred Commentary. Thoroughbred Commentary didn't really take ads for the first few years. They wanted to establish themselves, have the ability, the latitude to publish whatever they wanted, and then people can make their own minds up and see if they feel comfortable advertising in it. I think the problem when you have advertisers, or you're a house organ like the Blood Horse basically is for the Thoroughbred Owners and Breeders Association, the people that are the editors there, they are worried about what their advertisers are going to say. So if you can come up with some outlets that they don't have to worry about what the advertisers are going to say, at least you're ahead of the game in that respect.
Or you do what is happening and you do the nonprofit route. ProPublica is not beholden to any advertisers. It solicits money and donations from people, from philanthropists, from organizations who basically say, here's $50,000 or $100,000 or $5 or and it's they've been able, they're around 10 years and they've been able to establish a working budget and they do great stuff. The Marshall Project, 2 years old now. We had our anniversary yesterday. We do the same thing. We've gone to organizations, we have gone to individuals, and we've said we're not going to advertise. There's no advertisers. We're not going to be pressured by worrying about that, but we're asking you, if you care about criminal justice, for example, we're asking you to put your money where your mouth is.
Right.
You can give us $25, you can give us $250,000, but we're gonna be doing this. Is there enough of a base in thoroughbred racing to generate a nonprofit that would? I think there could be.
That's not the issue.
Yeah.
It's a matter of will. So, Natalie, changing the subject for a second, as an investigative journalist, have you written about any individuals or subjects that were so sensitive that you worried about your welfare?
It does occur to me as I'm researching a story and I get the feeling that someone knows I'm asking questions about them that can't lead to anything that's going to look positive for them. Sure. Like, how determined is this person to not have this story come out? But then I'm also somebody who overthinks things. So I never really know when stuff like that occurs to me, whether it's valid or not. But I will say that if I were somebody who had a greater visibility on the backstretch on a more regular basis, that would be a greater concern to me. Luckily, I am mostly doing things a little more behind the scenes. I'm focusing on features. I am out in the field, but not as much as I could be. So I feel like I don't have to think about that quite as much. I'm not as easy to find.
That's a whole other pressure when you're seeing people on a regular basis and you know that you have to keep them as sources.
Right.
And it's definitely pressure.
What I learned when I worked at the Racing Forum, that there were certain people that if you wrote any little insignificant thing and they were touchy or sensitive, they would go to great lengths to either get you fired, which happened to me once. I lost my job at the Thoroughbred Record because I wrote something about a trainer that thought I was taking a shot at him, which was preposterous. I wasn't. I wish I had known at the time, because maybe I would have taken the shot. But and then I also took to task the two biggest players in the game in California, Bill Shoemaker, the jock, and Charlie Whittingham, and I learned that I actually gained their respect by doing that. They thought that I showed guts, and even though it was a little tense for a little while, they took it like men. And I think that would happen in more instances than not.
It goes to the age-old question in journalism: access, right, versus independence.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
If you want to have access, if you want to get the get, especially in broadcast journalism, the interview, then you have to be respectful in a way that you don't necessarily have to be if you don't. I.F. Stone, I'm sure most viewers don't know who he is, but he was a iconic journalism. He was an icon back in the 40s and 50s. He was blind. He was terrible on TV. He was terrible on radio. He was almost blind. He would literally look through the congressional record, like this. But he got his stories not from access, but from digging through the documentation and building almost a lawyer's case. That's the kind of investigative journalism that is going to generate results, because once you're worried about access, then you are necessarily, in some fashion, whether it's an individual or a news organization, there's going to be punches that are pulled.
Yeah, I would say this. In thoroughbred racing, I can't imagine I can't come up with one name of a major player that would deny a legitimate turf rider access.
Right.
I don't care who they are. Do
That's
you agree
great.
with that? Have you been denied access?
Yes.
Oh, really? Okay. To a major player?
Yes.
Really? That's never happened to me.
It's not very common,
Right.
but
Yeah.
having seen that it can happen sort of further explains to me why people are unwilling to do this kind of thing.
Right.
Because
I think
that's
the
exactly
reason
what they're
that
right about.
could exist and might exist is because they know that, as an example, the Racing Forum, another publication I used to work for, they've gone through many iterations. When I was working there, you couldn't say anything. Joe Hirsch, who was a hell of a guy and a good turf rider, but he was Mr. Positive. Only once did he ever change his character when he went out after Angel Cordero once. But the Racing Forum, basically, they let the writers know that they don't want them to do anything, and if anybody ever complains to the editors, they're going to hear about it, the writer. So, okay. One thing
That was you're talking about back then, or you think that it's the
I
case
think
now?
it still happens.
I don't know about that.
Really? I hope not, but you don't see much in the Racing Forum anymore.
Well, I think they're serving a different audience today. It's more the gambling focus. It's not necessarily. They don't have the space. The paper is so much smaller now.
That's true. That's true. But they've gone up and down and up and down.
Mm-hmm.
You know, yeah. One thing that we're considering doing next year, instead of having one $25,000 award to the winner, is I'm thinking about having 5 $10,000 awards. Increase it from $25,000 to $50,000, and have 5 different categories. The best story, like we have been doing. Another one might be the most uplifting story. Another one would be written by somebody 25 or younger. I stole that idea from a different award. And then maybe the best blogger. You know, do something to try to encourage more people to do it.
So, some people, maybe with a contrarian point of view, might think that we're coming at this with an agenda. Do you want to address that?
Well, I don't know what I can say. When we first started out, Jeff and I approached the National Turf Riders with the idea of making the funding available and having them administering it. And they thought I had an agenda. I don't know what the heck the agenda would have been if I was letting them do everything. So they declined. So that's why Jeff and I just started doing it. But my only agenda, and it's been the same agenda all along, is I love racing. I loved track and field. And I saw what happened to track and field with cheating, with drugs, and I don't want to see the same thing happen to horse racing. I love it too much, and that's always been my sole agenda.
Right. Well, I grew up in harness racing, so it's kind of like you see things coming, you know, in that realm years ahead of thoroughbred racing. And he's a harness owner, and he's, you know, been outspoken and written quite a bit about it. So I mean, it's close to your heart, but yeah, also, you know, there's just not that kind of writing going on. It seems like that's more of where you're coming from, is
Right.
just make sure that it's actually getting out there.
Yeah, we just need to shine a light on what's going on in order to improve it. That's really about it.
Can I just say one more thing?
Yes, you
as
can.
we're going to wrap up. If I were, and we talked about this also earlier, there are 2 areas of horse racing that beg for more reporting. One is regulators and administrators, the administrative functions on the state level. You know, these are the people who are making decisions on cheating, on drug positives, on suspensions, and there is virtually no coverage of who these people are, how they get to be regulators, who put them into their positions, how much money they get, the extent to which they're bureaucrats. Administrative law judges that handle some of these cases, some of these appeals. There's almost no coverage of these people. I mean, you know, the industry says it's regulated. We argue about how well the regulation works, right, or doesn't work. We argue about how more strenuous it should be. But there is a regulatory scheme in place. I think in the most cases it's a sham. And I think that deserves to have a light shone on it. If we could identify these regulators, how they came into office, some of the decisions they make, some of the people to whom they're beholden, I think that would be a great service to thoroughbred racing, to harness racing. It's the same regulators. I think that is an area rife for more evaluation than it gets now. It's not always going to be exciting necessarily, but the idea that there could be corruption in these agencies, in these regulatory bodies, is one of those stories that you can pitch to a broader audience, that you can pitch to a Kentucky newspaper or even a national website. Hey, this is your regulator. This is what's happening in your state. It isn't right. And I think if you were to dig deep enough, you would find it isn't right in a lot of places.
Yeah, well, there was one major incident that happened in the last couple of years that it did get some coverage within the sport, but you talk about something that should have been covered in the general media is when Joe Gorajek from Indiana was let go. That was just the worst event ever. In that same regard, there was, I can't name the state, but there in a major racing venue, there was a public administrator who worked for regulators, and he was not following the correct protocol. When somebody was caught with a positive, instead of just giving them the days and the fine, he would meet with them, work out his own separate deals, and after a while, the trainers realized how they can just cheat as much as they want because nothing's going to happen to them, and he created a culture. This is 10, 12 years ago that still exists today. And there were some concerned Californians. Oh, I said it, didn't I? California, son of a gun. Yeah. And one of those guys, one of the owners, funded a private investigative journalist to go after this guy with the threat of exposing it. And they were able to have that guy disappear into the sunset. Now, I would much rather see something like that made public, because it's the same thing where that will then create a deterrent for others to not do that, have that same kind of aberrant behavior.
Well, that was on the Blood Horse ended up covering that eventually.
Yeah, eventually. Yeah. After the fact, though. Yep. Okay, well, I'd like to thank you for coming, Natalie. Thank you very much. It was very instructive. I'm sure people enjoyed hearing you. Andrew, it was great having you.
Sure.
And you're somebody we always look up to. Okay.
So I'll go over the list of nominees for the award. There were a total of 9. Natalie had 4 of them. Some of the others were Frank Hanks from the Blood Horse did a story on the effect of rule breaking in relation to owners and what kind of purse money, just kind of basically what were the long-term effects toward what they didn't earn for positives for their trainers. Then Bobby Ehalt wrote a story for Thoroughbred Commentary on an echocardiogram device that cost $300 that could save a horse's life. Margaret Ransom wrote a story on Maria Burrell that was published on usracing.com in the spring. That's kind of a long expose of that situation that led to some charges against Miss Burrell and her father. And Garden Waterstone for the Horseman and Fair World wrote a story on a situation at the Little Brown Jug harness race in Ohio where there was strange confluence of events that led to a protest involving some other trainers, and another trainer was found trying to inject a horse on race day. And then Natalie wrote about a trainer that was allowed to race in Florida for a while, even though he didn't. I guess he raced with a program trainer, and the track eventually, because of her reporting, made a decision to not allow that. She wrote about veterinarians' lists differing in state to state, and she wrote about out-of-competition testing. and then about snake oil salesmen on the internet with supplements that probably have no effect on horses. But we've asked another nominee, Ray Paulick, to contribute something this year. He's been an award winner in the past, and he's actually going to announce the winner.
I think one thing we should point out before that is that neither Jeff nor I have any input in terms of who wins. Okay, we have 5 judges. We upped the number of judges this year to avoid a tie, and the results are strictly the result of what the judge's opinion is.
Right. The judges, just so you all know, are Trevor Denman, the racetrack announcer, Hall of Fame jockey Chris McCarron, and then 3 long-serving turf riders, Mary Jean Wall, Michael Veach, and Neil Milbert. And they, out of their 5 votes, 3 of them selected the same story, and consequently the winner that Ray will announce right now.
I'm Ray Paulick, proud recipient of the 2013 Stan Bergstein Writing Award. I can't be in Kentucky for this year's presentation, but I'm honored to announce that Margaret Ransom is the 2016 Stan Bergstein Award winner for her article, The Shocking Untold Story of Maria Burrell. Margaret's piece, published at usracing.com, told in painstaking detail the story of the Breeders' Cup winning trainer Maria Burrell and the deplorable condition of horses that were under the care of her and her father at a Kentucky farm. It took hard work to put it all together and courage to publish it. The article got the attention of animal welfare officials, the mainstream media, and horse lovers everywhere. 1 month after publication of the article, the Burrells were charged with 43 counts of animal cruelty. Charles Burrell was arrested and eventually reached a plea agreement, avoiding jail time. Because the criminal charges are a misdemeanor, law enforcement officials have been unable to extradite Maria Burrell to Kentucky to face prosecution. In January, Kentucky legislators are expected to address this issue and consider stricter laws to protect abandoned or mistreated horses. Congratulations, Margaret. Your work has made a difference.
Well, we're here with Margaret Ransom. She came in from California to be with us today. And Margaret, congratulations.
Thank you very much. I'm touched. I'm honored. Thrilled. Beyond belief.
Well, I want to ask you just kind of how did this story come to be with, and what inspired you to, that's not necessarily the usracing.com, not necessarily the website that we would think of to host something like that, but how did that happen?
Well, as everybody knows, there was a big fracture between Maria and Gallery Racing, and it was all over social media right after the Breeders' Cup last year. Mm-hmm. And I had actually supported her because, Jim McIngvale has been difficult with some of his trainers. He has a certain program that he demands, and it seemed a little unfair after a huge win. And someone on her side, and word started sort of trickling out various places, and I started to pay attention a little bit more, and a couple of people had contacted me and said, you're a writer, can't you write? This is what's going on. And over a 6-month period, things kept coming out and kept coming out and kept coming out, and I read along with everybody else. Ray Paulick was on the story a lot from the beginning, and I decided that after she had had her fracture with Drawing Away, when they had hired her, my editor, Derek Simon at US Racing, I had just started with them. I'd taken a couple of years off, and he said, why don't you look into this? And all he said was this. And as I started that process with the Drawing Away, the separation with Drawing Away, it led to more of those initial sort of rumors and bubbling coming up, and one story led to another story to another person, and one person validated the next person's story, and it just sort of trickled out. And when I submitted it to Derek at US Racing, he thought it was just going to be the small sort of Drawing Away. He had no idea what was really going on, and I think nobody really did. And it took a couple of weeks for them to sort of mill it over. They had to go through legal.
Sure.
And we decided that we would take a chance because at the end of the day, like Derek said to me, he had said, you know, 50 people can't be wrong. And people have to hear this. And there are horses' lives on the line. And we are entrusted to take care of these horses. And if this is really what's going on, it needs to be made public. And so he took the gamble. And, you know, I couldn't thank him enough for backing me and really supporting this. And, you know, the end result is there are 43 horses that are alive today. And the industry really stepped in and helped them. And I could not be more proud to be part of the industry, just for that alone.
Great.
Right.
So,
Well, Barry, I know when you first thought of this award, it was after Stan Bergstein passed away. You were thinking foremost of stories that led to something, that created a result. So that's something that is definitely embodied in this award. But Margaret, you also had a relationship with Mr. Bergstein that you were telling me about.
I did,
So
yes.
I thought you might want to tell them also.
Like literally one of the nicest people I had ever met. And at the time I had been working in the racetrack program, I was Dave Hooper's sort of student assistant. You know, I had 3 years of college and my father said, get a job. And they hired me to do student work, and I would do a lot of Dave Hooper's correspondence. And a lot of it was interacting with Stan because he was so supportive of the program and the graduates and finding jobs and being active in the industry. And he was kind of, I was always taller than he was. He wasn't a very big man, but he was a big, just respected presence. And he had said to me once, he said, you should be a writer. You know, you'd be a good writer, just from reading my correspondence that I had helped Dave with. And at that time, I thought I'd be a steward or, I don't know. I was thinking about vet school. I had no idea what I was going to do. And that sort of led to my passion for writing about horse racing. I mean, I don't know anything else. Horse racing's all I know. And he introduced me at the symposium in, 92 to Joe Hirsch. They had honored him, and it was like a highlight. And he said, you have to meet him. You know, you have to meet Joe Hirsch. And I still have the autograph. They both signed it. I meant to bring it. But it was an honor to have known Stan. And he had a guy working for him for a long time, Paul Estock, who I went to college with. And Paul said, I think he would have been proud of you.
Good. Well, I hope this is not going to be your last blockbuster piece.
No, I'm not going to look away again. I'm not going to turn away and say this is somebody else's problem. It is all of our problems to take care of these horses and regulating medication, all those things. Sometimes I see things and someone else will do it. I'm not going to do it again. I have a voice. I now know that I have a voice.
Good for you. Great.
So I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Okay, Jeff, give her the check.
Well, we have a official check, and then we have this check we can put on front.
I always wanted a big check.
So, and then we have this award from Nia Kaiser out in California that did the Zenyatta statue.
Beautiful.
So you can take that on the plane with you.
Yeah. Hook it under my arm. I don't know if it'll make it through security checkpoint, but
You'll be fine.
I love it. Thank you. I'm honored, and I know that you've championed this for a long time, and you and I had a discussion at Santa Anita. You were signing books a long time ago, and you had said, use your voice. Use your voice. I complimented you on a horse, and you said, use your voice.
Good.
And I appreciate that.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you very much. And thank you, everybody that was involved. And that concludes our program until next year. Thank you very much.